The cold wind of the barren world swept across the ruins like a forgotten ghost. Alex Mercer stood at the edge of the massive crater, the remnants of an ancient alien city scattered in jagged, lifeless piles of stone and metal. He adjusted his helmet, the weight of it pulling his thoughts back to the present, back to the mission. It had been 2 months since the Federation had dispatched him here to investigate the ruins, a desolate place they suspected held more than just debris. They were right. "Mercer!" The voice crackled over the comms. Colonel Elias Ward's tone was calm but laced with urgency. "What's your status?" Alex gripped his rifle tighter. "The ruins are as empty as you said. Nothing but rusted metal and forgotten history." "Then why are you still there?" Ward pressed. "We've got readings. Something's triggering near your position. Get back to the landing zone, now." Alex's eyes narrowed. He didn't trust the readings. They were inconsistent, erratic. There were whispers of something else buried here, something that shouldn't be disturbed. But duty had always come first, even if his instincts screamed otherwise. A rumble beneath his feet jolted him out of his thoughts. The ground trembled, and a sharp, piercing hum vibrated through the air. Alex froze. That wasn't from the wreckage. He glanced to the right, where a large, shadowed opening in the side of the crater revealed the faintest flicker of blue light. He had to investigate. He moved forward, his boots crunching against the dry earth, his mind trying to push back the nagging sense that he was making a mistake. The faint glow intensified as he neared, and it became clear that the light wasn't coming from any natural source. It was something old, something artificial. He stepped cautiously into the narrow passage that led into the depths of the crater, his rifle raised, eyes scanning every inch of the jagged walls. The hum grew louder, almost welcoming. It reverberated in his chest as though it were alive. Alex reached a massive, circular door, its surface smooth and undisturbed by time. A strange glyph glowed at its center. It looked like nothing he had ever seen, a swirling pattern that twisted in on itself, as though designed to confuse the mind. He felt a pull, a deep, primal instinct that whispered for him to touch it. "Mercer!" Ward's voice again broke through, but Alex couldn't focus on it. The pull was too strong. With one hand, he placed his palm flat against the door. A sudden, overwhelming rush of energy surged through him, making his heart race and his vision blur. The glyph flared bright, and with a hiss, the door slowly began to open. The chamber inside was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and upon it, the source of the light, armor. It gleamed with an otherworldly sheen, shaped like a humanoid figure but unlike anything Alex had ever seen. It seemed to pulse with energy, and the armor's presence filled the room with a weight that pressed down on his chest. The hum grew louder, more insistent, and now, the ground beneath him began to tremble in sync with the armor's pulse. The room had become alive, the very walls radiating energy. Alex hesitated, but a voice in his head, the same primal instinct, told him to approach. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped forward. His hand trembled as he reached for the armor, and the moment his fingers brushed the surface, a blinding light erupted from it. He jerked back instinctively, but it was too late. The light engulfed him, and for a split second, he felt as though his very soul was being pulled into the armor. Then, just as suddenly, everything stopped. Alex blinked, disoriented. The light had vanished, but the sensation of energy was still coursing through his body. He felt different, stronger somehow. A hum resonated in his bones, synchronized with the pulsing energy of the armor. His breath came in shallow gasps as he looked down at himself, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. "Mercer!" Ward's voice crackled, more frantic now. "What the hell just happened? Your signal is..." Alex couldn't respond. His body was no longer his own. His senses felt heightened, sharper. His muscles, once sore from the long trek, felt suddenly renewed, infused with power. He glanced at his hands, which were now covered in a sleek, dark material, the armor. It had bonded with him, as though it were an extension of his body. He reached down instinctively, and a panel on his wrist slid open to reveal a series of glowing symbols that seemed to understand his thoughts. "Mercer!" Ward shouted again, his voice laced with both worry and anger. "I don't know what's going on, but you need to get out of there. Now!" Alex couldn't tear his eyes away from the armor, from the way it seemed to fit him, as though it had always belonged. A low hum reverberated in his chest, and suddenly the armor's purpose became clearer. It wasn't just a piece of technology. It was a weapon, a force, and it had chosen him. He had no time to process this. A wave of realization crashed over him. The Verkan Empire would come for this armor. If word got out that humanity had unlocked something like this, the galaxy would erupt. War would break out. And Alex? He was the only one who could wield it. Alex snapped to attention. "Ward, I need a pickup. Now." The urgency in his voice was enough to snap Ward out of his disbelief. "On our way. You've got 5 minutes, Mercer. Don't make me regret sending you down there." Alex looked back at the pedestal one last time, his heart pounding. There was no going back. He wasn't just a soldier anymore, he was something else. Something more. And that terrified him. The ground beneath his feet trembled once again, the hum of the armor vibrating in sync with his heart. He turned and sprinted for the exit, his new body moving with a fluidity and strength he had never known before. As he emerged from the dark chamber and into the light of the surface, his eyes caught the horizon. In the distance, he could already see the flash of enemy ships descending. The war for humanity's future had just begun. The roar of the engines vibrated through Alex's bones as the dropship descended toward the surface of the barren world. His helmet, now securely attached, felt heavier than ever. His breath came in shallow bursts, the reality of what he had just become settling over him like a dark cloud. The armor wasn't just a piece of technology, it was alive, and somehow, it had chosen him. But why? "Mercer, you there?" Colonel Ward's voice cut through the static in his comms. "You're running out of time. The Verkan are coming. They know you're there, and they're pissed." Alex swallowed hard, trying to focus. The Verkan Empire, an ancient, brutal race of conquerors, had been a constant threat to humanity's existence in this corner of the galaxy. If they knew about the armor, they would come in full force. And when they did, there would be no mercy. "I'm here, Colonel. And I've got the armor." His voice was low, almost robotic as he spoke, his body still adjusting to the overwhelming power coursing through him. The armor was synced with his nervous system in ways that were beyond understanding. It wasn't just reactive, it anticipated. "You're going to need more than that," Ward said with a sigh. "We've got a few minutes until the Verkan flagship drops out of warp. Get to the rendezvous point. We'll be there in 5. "Copy that," Alex replied, before cutting the comms. The dropship touched down with a loud thud, kicking up dust as the ramp lowered. The light of a distant sun cast long shadows over the alien ruins, the terrain untouched for centuries. Alex stepped off the craft, his boots hitting the cracked earth with a solid thud. His mind was still a haze, but the purpose was clear now. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a weapon. The weight of it pressed down on him. The armor felt strangely comforting, almost like it was an old friend, or a protector. He raised his arm, watching the gauntlet flex in perfect synchronization with his muscles. It felt natural, the way it fit him. The armor wasn't just technology, it was part of him now. The panels on his chest shimmered with light, and the strange glyphs that had appeared on his wrist flickered as if reacting to his thoughts. His mission was simple. He needed to get to the extraction point. The Federation had dispatched a small fleet to assist him in retrieving any valuable intel from the ruins, but that was before they realized the true importance of what had been uncovered. The Verkan were already en route. And that meant there was no time to waste. As he walked through the ancient streets of the ruined city, his eyes scanned the horizon. The wind picked up, kicking small stones into the air, but the armor's systems adapted immediately, adjusting his posture to compensate for the gusts. It was as though the very environment had become secondary to the armor's capabilities. "Colonel, the extraction point's still clear?" Alex asked, his voice calm despite the chaos swirling inside him. For now, Ward's voice crackled back through his calms. But you need to hurry. The Verkin are faster than you think. Just as he spoke, Alex's eyes caught a glint in the sky. A streak of light, a ship. It was moving too quickly to be a natural object. It wasn't one of the Federation's dropships. It was too sleek, too deadly. The Verkin flagship. Damn it! Alex muttered under his breath. He broke into a sprint, the power of the armor propelling him forward faster than he thought possible. His muscles burned, but the armor seemed to absorb the strain, feeding him energy that kept his body in peak condition. He leaped over debris, vaulted between the broken remnants of alien structures, and pushed forward. The ground beneath his feet trembled again, but this time, it was different. The Verkin were close. He could feel it. His pulse quickened, and for the first time, he felt something other than the cold, efficient mindset of a soldier. There was fear. The enemy was relentless, and this armor, as much of a gift as it seemed, was a heavy burden. He wasn't just carrying a weapon now, he was carrying the future of humanity on his shoulders. As he neared the rendezvous point, a new sensation washed over him. The armor was calling him. It wasn't a voice, not in the traditional sense, but more like a silent suggestion, a pull that he couldn't explain. It beckoned him to a nearby structure, an ancient, half-collapsed tower. It wasn't the extraction point, but something about it felt important, as though the armor had a purpose for him there. Against his better judgment, Alex veered off course and sprinted toward the tower. Mercer, what the hell are you doing? Ward's voice barked over the comms. You need to be at the extraction point now. I need to check something, Alex replied, his voice tight. I'll be there in a minute. The closer he got to the tower, the stronger the pull became. The armor hummed in response, resonating with an energy that seemed to emanate from the structure itself. He reached the base of the tower, the faint blue light from the armor glowing brighter, as if guiding him toward the entrance. He pressed a hand against the crumbling wall. With a hiss, the entrance slid open. Inside, the chamber was small but pristine, untouched by the ravages of time. A pedestal stood in the center, a similar glyph etched into its surface. This was no coincidence. Alex stepped forward, reaching for the glyph. The moment his fingers brushed the stone, a jolt of energy shot through him. His vision blurred, and the armor seemed to react violently, its systems firing into overdrive. A sudden flood of information poured into his mind, memories, thoughts, and sensations not his own. The armor's history, its purpose, all of it flooded him in an overwhelming surge. He staggered backward, gasping for air. What the hell? But then he understood. The armor wasn't just a weapon, it was the last of a lost civilization. A defense mechanism. And it had been waiting for a worthy vessel. Alex, get out of there now! Ward's voice cut through the chaos in his head. The Verkin are here! The urgency in Ward's tone snapped Alex back to reality. He turned, his pulse racing, his mind still reeling from the revelations. There was no time left. He sprinted back to the extraction point, the Verkin flagship now looming in the sky like a dark omen. The ship had dropped out of warp, and the battle for the future of humanity was about to begin. As Alex reached the extraction point, the ground trembled once again, this time from the sheer weight of the Verkin forces descending. The Federation fleet was arriving, but the fight would be harder than anyone had anticipated. The war for the galaxy was about to get personal. Alex stood at the edge of the battlefield, the weight of the armor heavy on his shoulders. The Federation fleet had arrived just in time, but even their combined firepower seemed insignificant against the massive Verkin flagship hovering above the ruined city. The sky had turned an unnatural shade of crimson as the ship unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, cutting deep into the ground, incinerating anything in its path. Mercer, we need you out there! Colonel Ward's voice crackled in his comms, filled with urgency. Your armor's our best shot at holding them back. Alex's hand tightened around the hilt of the energy blade that had materialized at his side. The armor had adapted to him so seamlessly that it felt like an extension of his own body. He could feel the power pulsing through him, raw, untamed, and yet terrifyingly controlled. But it wasn't enough. The Verkin were too powerful. He could already see their forces descending, elite shock troopers clad in black and red armor, their massive ships dropping down like deadly vultures to pick apart the remains of the battlefield. "I'm ready," Alex muttered to himself, trying to ignore the flood of doubt threatening to overwhelm him. There was no turning back now. The armor had chosen him for a reason. It had awakened inside him, and now it was time to see what it could really do. He sprinted forward, faster than he'd ever moved before. His legs were a blur as the armor's systems boosted his strength, the ground beneath his feet cracking with every step. The Verkin soldiers, already advancing on the Federation forces, barely had time to react before Alex collided with them in a flash of motion. The first strike came with a brutal efficiency. Alex's energy blade sliced through the air with a screeching hum, severing the head of a Verkin shock trooper clean from its body. The alien's helmet hit the ground with a hollow thud, the body crumpling to the earth in a heap. Before the next wave of Verkin could retaliate, Alex was already on the move again, his armor shifting to increase his agility. He ducked under an incoming blaster bolt and somersaulted into the air, twisting mid-flight to land behind an armored Verkin soldier. The soldier never saw it coming. Alex's fist, augmented by the power of the suit, struck with the force of a freight train, sending the alien flying into a pile of rubble. His enemies were fast, but Alex's instincts, enhanced by the armor, were faster. A Verkin commander appeared in the distance, a hulking figure wielding a massive energy mace. The commander's eyes glowed with an unsettling, otherworldly hue, and his roar reverberated across the battlefield. He raised his weapon, charging toward Alex with a terrifying speed. But Alex didn't hesitate. The armor's systems analyzed the attack, calculating the trajectory and speed of the enemy's charge in mere seconds. Alex's hand tightened around his energy blade, and with a roar of his own, he surged forward. The two met in a clash of energy and steel. The commander's mace collided with Alex's blade in a burst of sparks, the shockwave rattling Alex's bones. The Verkin commander grinned, the satisfaction of his blow evident in his predatory smile. But Alex wasn't done. The armor had amplified his strength and precision, and as the commander raised his mace for another strike, Alex pivoted, dodging to the side. In that single, fluid motion, Alex drove the energy blade through the commander's side. The Verkin's armor cracked, the energy blade cutting through it like a hot knife through butter. The alien let out a garbled scream as his body crumpled to the ground, lifeless. For a moment, Alex stood over the fallen commander, catching his breath. He felt the strange pull of the armor once again, an insistent whisper at the back of his mind urging him forward. This was only the beginning. "Alex, look out!" Ward's voice shouted through the comms, pulling him from his thoughts. Alex turned just in time to see another wave of Verkin soldiers rushing toward him, their guns raised. They fired in unison, energy bolts streaking through the air. The armor reacted instantly. A shield materialized around him, flickering to life just as the first shot impacted. The impact reverberated through the shield, but it held, the energy dissipating harmlessly. Alex took a step forward, the shield retracting as he sprinted into the storm of fire. He ducked and weaved through the incoming fire, the armor's enhanced reflexes allowing him to avoid nearly every shot. The Verkin soldiers were skilled, but they were slow compared to him. He was a blur of motion, moving through them with surgical precision. His energy blade flashed again, cutting down two more soldiers in quick succession. The armor's systems tracked every movement, calculating angles, speeds, and probabilities with frightening accuracy. But Alex was starting to feel it, the weight of the responsibility pressing on him. The Verkin wouldn't stop until they had everything they wanted, and he was their target now. "Alex, you're running out of time," Ward warned again, his voice clipped with anxiety. "The Verkin flagship is charging up its main cannon. If they fire, we're all dead." The words hit Alex like a slap to the face. His eyes shot up to the sky. The massive Verkin ship had shifted into position, the main cannon charging with a menacing hum. If that weapon fired, it would obliterate the Federation fleet and anything else in its path. But the armor had already made its decision. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a key to something much bigger. Alex's heart raced as he understood what he had to do. "Colonel, I'm going after the flagship," Alex said, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around him. "Are you crazy?" Ward responded. "You can't take on that ship alone." Alex didn't have time to argue. His hand went to the side of his helmet, activating the suit's systems. The HUD in his visor flashed, displaying the Vulcan flagship's weak points. The armor's AI, integrated with his mind, guided him, giving him precise calculations of the ship's movements. The Vulcan flagship was vulnerable, but only in one place, its propulsion systems. If he could disable them, even for a few moments, it would be enough to buy the Federation fleet some time. Without another word, Alex sprinted toward the nearest transport ship, launching himself onto its hull as it took off toward the sky. The weight of the battle still raged beneath him, but Alex knew one thing for sure. The armor was more than just an object. It was a part of him, and with it, he could do anything. He just had to survive long enough to prove it. The transport ship rumbled beneath Alex's feet as it ascended through the turbulent atmosphere. Outside, the skies were ablaze with the dying embers of explosions and the streaking trails of enemy fire. Below him, the battlefield stretched out in a chaotic mix of smoke, dust, and the flickering of energy blasts. The Federation was struggling to hold the line, but the true battle lay ahead. Alex's gaze fixed on the distant Vulcan flagship, looming like a dark omen against the fiery backdrop. Its enormous, menacing silhouette seemed to warp the air around it, distorting the view of the heavens. The Vulcan ship was a towering mass of armor and weaponry, and it was charging up its main cannon again. He could feel the urgency building, the clock ticking down. His fingers tightened around the controls of the transport. He wasn't sure he could make it in time. The ship's trajectory had been set, but the armor's AI had already begun calculating the best route. Every piece of data streamed through his visor, projecting the optimal angles, speeds, and calculations required to reach the heart of the storm. It was all instinct now. "Mercer, you're crazy!" Ward's voice crackled in his comms, snapping him back to the present. "The ship's defense grid is too tight. You won't survive that close. Abort!" "I don't have time to argue, Colonel," Alex replied, his voice steady but strained. "If I don't stop that cannon, we're all dead anyway." His transport broke through the last layer of clouds and emerged into the cold vacuum of space. The view was breathtaking, stars glittered in every direction, and the gargantuan Vulcan flagship stood like a monolithic titan against the vastness of the cosmos. Alex could see the pulsating energy at the heart of the ship, the epicenter of the destruction it was about to unleash. "I'll figure something out," Alex muttered to himself, half to reassure Ward, half to convince himself. The transport veered toward the Vulcan ship, and Alex's hand instinctively moved to the activation panel on his armor's gauntlet. The armor responded to his touch with a low hum, and the HUD in his visor flared to life with additional data. The targeting system was fully engaged, calculating not just trajectory but potential weak points, vulnerabilities Alex hadn't even known existed. The flagship's defenses were formidable, and as the transport closed in, a swarm of Vulcan fighter ships peeled off from the hull like deadly insects, swarming around him in a circular formation. The flashing lights of their weapons' fire lit up the blackness of space like deadly fireworks. "They're coming for you, Mercer!" Ward shouted in his earpiece. "Get ready to take evasive maneuvers!" Alex's eyes narrowed as he watched the incoming fighters. He knew that if he didn't shake them off, they would be on him in seconds. With a flick of his wrist, he ordered the armor's propulsion systems to engage, and his body was thrust forward with terrifying force. The transport accelerated, narrowly missing a barrage of plasma bolts that burned through space behind him. He could almost feel the heat on his skin despite the suit's layers of protection. The fighters began to close in, but Alex's mind was a machine, processing everything in real time. He analyzed their movement patterns, predicting their next moves, reading their formations. There was no hesitation, no fear, just calculated precision. As the nearest fighter made a move to flank him, Alex activated the transport's weapon systems. Twin energy cannons on either side of the ship flared to life, and with a series of rapid bursts, the closest fighter was torn apart in a shower of metal and energy. But there were more. The swarm continued to press forward, their energy shields glowing as they scattered, trying to confuse his targeting systems. Alex could feel the sweat beading on his brow as the battle grew more intense, but there was no room for panic. He was locked in now. The armor had chosen him, and it would not fail. "Get the hell out of there, Alex!" Ward's voice again, desperate now. "You're playing with fire!" Alex gritted his teeth, focusing every ounce of his will on the task ahead. He wasn't just fighting for his survival, he was fighting for the entire fleet, for humanity's future. And as if the armor sensed his resolve, it surged with newfound power, boosting his reflexes and response times even further. Another fighter came into view, its weapons charging for another strike. Alex barely had time to process the threat before he launched himself into the attack. He detonated a series of pulse grenades from the transport's underside, creating a shockwave that obliterated 2 of the approaching ships. The blast sent the remaining Vulcan fighters scattering, leaving Alex with a brief moment of calm. That was all he needed. The Vulcan flagship loomed closer now, and Alex could see the massive energy cannon charging up, its core glowing with an ominous red light. If he didn't act fast, the Federation fleet would be vaporized before they could retaliate. He switched the transport's engines into high gear and rocketed forward, aiming directly for the vulnerable propulsion systems. The flagship's defenses were formidable, but Alex had already anticipated their movements. His eyes locked onto the massive energy vents at the rear of the ship. The targeting system hummed as it calculated the best angle of attack. A single breath. Then, Alex pulled the trigger. The transport's weapons discharged in a symphony of energy blasts, each one tearing into the massive ship's hull. The first shot hit the rear engines, and the flagship shuddered as sparks flew from the damaged area. Alex's pulse quickened. The shot had been true. But the Vulcan flagship wasn't done yet. The ship's main cannon continued to charge. Its dark energy began to coalesce into an unstable sphere at its center, a weapon that could obliterate entire fleets. Alex didn't have much time. His hand slammed against the console, rerouting power to the transport's emergency thrusters. The ship lurched forward, and Alex leaped from the transport, the armor instantly adapting to his trajectory. The impact of his landing sent shockwaves through his body, but he gritted his teeth and pressed on. The flagship loomed right in front of him now, its defenses activating as the massive cannon came to life. Alex sprinted toward the core of the ship, a sea of Vulcan soldiers emerging from the shadows to stop him. The armor's AI surged in response, calculating every possible move, and Alex didn't hesitate. He was a blur, a shadow, cutting down Vulcan after Vulcan with surgical precision. The air around him crackled with energy as he charged forward, the hum of his energy blade merging with the roar of the flagship's weapon systems. The battlefield was in chaos, but Alex knew that this moment, this final push, would decide the fate of everything. As the cannon's energy reached its peak, Alex saw his opening. He dove forward, slamming into the core of the ship. The ground beneath him cracked as the suit's strength surged. The blast from the cannon was moments away, but Alex had one last card to play. The armor knew what had to be done. The AI's calculations took over, and Alex's body was the instrument of destruction. The ship's core began to collapse under his assault, the armor's power tearing through the structure. And in that moment, Alex Mercer knew, this wasn't just a battle for survival. This was the turning point of humanity's fight against the Vulcan.